Good morning, everybody. I'm Christina Sorrento. I'm the chief of IRC, and this is the DRC meeting for 5212 Massachusetts Avenue. Your lead reviewer is actually Katie Macarini, but today Grace Bogdan is standing in for her at the moment. So Grace has brought up the plan on the screen. The purpose of this meeting is for the applicant to ask any questions that you might have based upon the comments you received last week. And this meeting is being recorded and live streamed, and I will ask Grace to kind of highlight some of the major issues we should talk about, and then really this is the applicant's meeting. So Grace, go right ahead.
Thanks, Christina. So as she said, I'm filling in for Katie, and she gave me some of the main bullet points here. As you all know, this is a preliminary plan to abandon an existing piece of dedicated right-of-way along Massachusetts Avenue. And so the key comments that Katie gave me is that the base MCDOT review fee is missing, and so that will need to be submitted to have that review completed. There is the forest conservation applies here, and so you will need to apply for a forest conservation exemption. And then in terms of the existing PUE, the request is to continue that PUE along the way to Massachusetts Avenue property line. And then lastly, to confirm with DPS that a stormwater management concept is or is not needed. And if it is needed, then you will need to resubmit one with your next submittal. And so those are the high points here. It seems pretty straightforward. And I know that Katie had already mentioned to you guys that she wouldn't be here. So I will do my best to answer any questions, but hopefully you can reserve those for when she gets back. But you can always direct your comments to the other agencies here.
And Grace, just to say, oh, sorry, Pat. I see that Rebecca says that they did pay the MCDOT fee.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you, Grace. This is Pat Harris with Laura Turley, and the applicant Dale and Peter Terza are on the line, as is Andy Bradshaw of JBA. So a couple of items. I think there's a little bit of confusion here, and this had occurred early on, and we had a discussion with Christina about this, that while an abandonment takes the form of a preliminary plan, it's not really a preliminary plan. And so for that reason, there were a couple of comments that really aren't relevant. One is the stormwater. I mean, we're not building anything. There's no disturbance going on. The second one is the forest conservation. I don't think that forest conservation is actually triggered. And in fact, we had a email with Christina back May 12th where she confirmed that. And then the other comment where I think there was a misunderstanding, because there is no development going on, is there was a request for a noise study, which doesn't seem relevant here either. Other than that, the rest of the comments regarding the PUE, we can comply with all the rest of the comments, but those three, I think we need confirmation that in fact our understanding is correct.
That's helpful, Pat. And so then I'm just thinking about like the findings that we need to make for the preliminary plans specific to the stormwater. Do we need an email, I guess, from DPS saying that it doesn't apply here?
So this is Andrew Kohler with Water Resources. If you guys email Mark very clearly what you're doing, he'll respond back saying you guys have met the requirements. I agree that a formal concept won't be required, but it still needs to be addressed in that letter. So work with Mark on that, Andy. And if you have any questions, no.
No problem, Andrew.
Cool.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so that's that one. Then the forest conservation exemption. I think Christina already spoke to that one. I don't know if we need to do anything more to tie that one up.
Have you forwarded that email to Katie and or Marco?
Don't know, but I will.
Katie was not on that email from May 12th and or Marco.
Yeah, I think if there's like a section number or something, anything that helps us write our staff report as to the language as to why it doesn't apply would be helpful.
Right. Okay. And I realize you guys don't get these very often, and so we're all sort of have to go back and reread the code when these unusual abandonments come up. And then the noise study, that one seems like an easy one, that obviously we're not building anything. There's no noise study should be required.
Yeah, I would just handle that in your response to comments.
Okay.
So the way it was phrased, the way that comment was phrased is that we may be recommending a condition that occur at time of building permit, whenever that would be, but that's not. Anyway, it just says may, so we're
Okay.
Yeah,
still
potentially. Yeah, I think it was the way.
Okay,
Marco-
I misunderstood that, Marco. Thank you. Okay, so we'll send in, we'll circle back with Mark for the stormwater and then our response letter back to you with the comments. We'll address the other two. And in the meantime, I'll forward the email, Christina's May 12th email to Katie and to Marco, and Grace, I'll copy you just since you're the point of contact, at least in the interim.
Sounds good.
And also, real quick, one thing, part of the Marco comment was also to show contours and other base information.
Oh, right.
It's the same support from Christina's support of our not requiring a forest conservation exemption because technically it's not a preliminary plan. So I just wanted to make sure we spoke on that specifically as well, that, for contours and typical base information you would find as part of a preliminary plan, we don't have that as part of this plan because it's technically not a preliminary plan. We'll make sure that was okay as well.
backyard.
Christina, Mark, do you have any comments on that?
Sorry, it's just my understanding was that it is a subdivision and preliminary plan but per I guess the other correspondence, you demonstrate it's technically not, then I guess you don't have to meet the submission requirements of a preliminary plan. But up until this moment, it wasn't clear to me that this is an actually preliminary plan, especially when it, has a preliminary plan number.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe an overarching.
There's no mechanism to handle these otherwise. So they say it takes the form of, but it's not a preliminary plan. So that's the root of the confusion.
So then I guess the question is, do we have to make preliminary plan findings?
Christina?
Yeah, Grace, let's talk about this offline a little bit, but I mean, it takes the form of a preliminary plan like Pat is saying, but it's unique because there's some things that just aren't applicable, if you want to think about it that way. But yeah, we could talk about it in more detail. We've had these in the past, and in some ways it might be beneficial to look at some of those past reports.
Definitely. Okay. Sounds good.
Good. And then our planning board hearing September 29th. 29th. Okay. And obviously we will have no trouble getting what you need back in within the next 2 weeks.
Great.
Okay.
And your final first submittal July 26th, final submittal. I'm sorry, first resubmittal July 6th, final July 26th, and then your agency letter deadline is August 15th.
Okay. That's helpful. Andy, anything else?
Nope, that covers everything.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, everyone.
right.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
See you. Okay.
Good,
Bye.
thank you.
This is the DRC meeting for Nash Country Estates lots 9 and 10. I'm Christina Sorrento. I'm the chief of the Intake and Regulatory Coordination Division. And your lead reviewer is Jonathan Casey. Thank you for bringing up the plan, Sandra. The purpose of this meeting is really for the applicant to ask any questions you might have based upon the comments you received last week. And I'll ask Jonathan first to highlight any of the bigger issues that we should talk about, and then really turn it over to the applicant. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed. So Jonathan, go right ahead.
All right, good. Should I be looking at the screen, I guess?
It's wherever you want.
All right, well, good morning. I'm Jonathan Casey. So I guess the question here is, can these two parcels be grandfathered? Right now, to be honest, we cannot make a determination because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of information. There's, I believe, Casey Cerner is also representing you. She is working with Steve Smith, who I've been coordinating with on potentially actually qualifying these as pre-58 parcels.
Yes.
So we have a kind of a dueling situation here. And based on the information that was submitted to Steve and what was submitted here, some of the things just don't line up. And we need to really kind of do like a in-depth timeline and figure out what the process should be.
No, I understand, because I think Steve Smith corresponded with Casey Cerner about a week and a half ago, asked for additional information regarding the changes in the lot sizes.
Yeah.
And Dean Packer has the explanation for that, but that's not, I guess, for this meeting. That's for a separate discussion.
It is an addition.
Yes. So sorry, one second. Just for anyone who may be viewing, we have under review this application, an administrative subdivision, a request for 2 lots to be recorded. Separate and apart from this, you have an attorney who is working with Steve Smith in the IRC division to try to determine if these are pre-58 parcels that don't require platting, which is outside of our review here, right? Is that the conversation I'm hearing?
Correct.
They relate.
To a certain extent.
Well, I understand they relate, but I'm saying we don't review pre-58 parcels as part of admin subs. I think the conversation is confusing. So I just want to make sure anyone that may be listening from the public understands there are 2 different conversations going on.
Yes.
And that was my understanding as well. I thought this was separate.
Yeah.
Right. So do we have any comments we'd like to talk about related to the admin sub? I think it'd be best to do it here if you have any questions.
Patrick, this is Josh, real quick to chime in. Sorry. The question of the pre-58, non-pre-58 also ties into density. If they're not grandfathered to the previous zone, there are no density available for these lots. So the subdivision cannot proceed forward until we determine what level of this is, whether they're pre-58 or if they're grandfathered or if they're not grandfathered. If they're not grandfathered to a previous zone, there is no density available for these 2 parcels.
Because this application is proposing grandfathering under the previous zone, which the most recent one where these could potentially be platted was RE2. So they wouldn't actually need a TDR for it. They would be platting under the prior
But when,
zone, under the RE2 standards.
and Josh, when you say there's no density, it's because this is AR zone
Correct.
and they
Correct.
don't have 25 acres. The subject property is 16 and some acres,
Less than 15.
Yeah, just
less than
just under
15,
15.
right? So that's front and center, the biggest issue that we need to get past.
Right.
In order
These
to
lots
get any
cannot
other-
be built. These lots cannot be built under the AR zone.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. No, I get that. All right.
So we're either looking at grandfathering them or pre-58.
Yeah.
Those are really-
Grandfathering to
those are really-
RE2.
Those are the only 2 options for these properties to be recorded
Got
and
it.
made buildable as 2 separate properties.
Okay. Yeah. We said grandfathering, then we transitioned to pre-58, and I was not following that. So now I get it now. Okay.
It's all very, very muddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think from a subdivision standpoint, I think that those are the comments that we need to look at this in more depth and figure out a couple of discrepancies between what's shown on the admin sub and what was shown on some of the other documents you had submitted. They don't quite match up the property lines, as well as the meets and bounds. There's some measurements that are significantly different. Other than that, I think the other agencies have a number of comments to provide.
If I could just maybe give a little bit of his history, and Dean can chime in as well, because I think it may have some relevance to what we're discussing here today. I don't know, and if it doesn't, I'm sorry. But part of the confusion that's regarding this exemption is that these two parcels, or this particular parcel, the 15 plus acres, was actually created like recreated in 1980, because the back portion of this property was taken by Park and Planning for part of the Rachel Carson Park. What happened is that 2 years after the property was transferred to the county realized there was a house on the back of that with people living in it. And if you look at the documentation, you see that it was almost an immediate transfer back. And you could see the county attorney sort of panicked because of liability issues with having a private dwelling located on what was county property at the time. And it actually occurred within like 2 weeks of them discovering this error that was made. It was transferred back to the Carpusas, which was the previous owner. That's the source of a lot of the confusion that results here, including even boundaries, because the boundaries were then sort of redrawn at that time and staked. And Dean Packard, I think, his position will be that some of these things were actually surveyed in error. In other words, he found some of the original pins that were put in from the original survey, and those were not what the county came up with when they feeded it back. And I was actually hit by one particular issue when I first purchased this property, because the guy next to me, the neighbor to the right, Mr. Beresford, asserted adverse possession. That's how I got involved with Casey Cerner, because he denied me access to the property. He actually closed off the right portion of that property where that driveway is, right where that little ticker is. And that shut me down for about 6 months, not being able to do anything until I reached into basically a licensing agreement with my neighbor that gives him 4 years of access to that before it reverts back to me. And that was a negotiated settlement. But part of the issues with the boundaries is related to the original surveys, because all of the neighbors did not believe or they believed that they actually owned more property than what they did as a result of this. So that's part of this backdrop. It's a very, very confusing situation. I discovered most of this after I purchased the property.
This is probably one of the most.
I apologize. This is Dean Packard. I had my computer wasn't signing on, so I had to sign on my phone. So I missed the first couple minutes. But what I did with the boundary survey is we went back, we went to the deeds, and it does not match SDAT, because SDAT is incorrect, and everything on Park and Planning and everything as far as property goes is incorrect. We went back to the deeds and surveyed the deeds, and then we went to, as was just stated by Phil, that the county hired a surveyor to create the parkland in the back for the watershed. And they actually, I don't understand how they did it, but they shifted the whole property boundary to the left 35 feet. And that's what creates the possession line issue on the right side. Now, the possession, it's along the right side property line, there's a triangular piece. And we had to abide by the park monumentation in the back corner as to the property corner. And that's what cut off the triangular piece 35 feet wide in the back, and it narrows to 0 in the front. It affected the right property, but the left property, but we're not involved with that. But the whole, reestablished the whole boundary for the property when the plat was recorded and the survey was done. And then the other part was The deeds were written to the center line of Gregg Road, and Gregg Road moved over the last 70 years. So that's what created this boundary survey that, we did an extensive amount of work to try to establish it. And I feel that it is certifiably correct.
So, Dean, one of my comments on the plan was that this plan doesn't actually match the composite document that you put together. So that sliver that's kind of was essentially carved off one of the parcels isn't shown on this plan.
Okay.
Also, it's not clear where the piece of property was deeded back, the pieces that were deeded back from the park, those are not shown on this plan either. So we have to have the, context when we're looking at the subdivision. This shows what you're proposing, but it's not clear what's there now.
This is what he is referring to, is this back corner was technically over about here. That's the triangle that goes out to Gregg Road that he's referring to. In other words, that was what was surveyed.
Yeah.
For other people in the room that may not know what we're talking about, that's the little sliver that he's referring to.
And
I hear you, Jonathan, and I can clear up the confusion from your part to make all the plans in the boundary survey match.
Okay.
Should we hear from the other agencies on
Yeah.
major comments or issues?
Well,
Or maybe Dean?
Can we start with well and septic? Thanks, Jason Clement.
Yes, Jason, do you have any comments?
Okay, I'm here. Sorry, I was muted. I apologize for that. I was like, why can't anybody hear me? Sorry. Yes, this is Jason Fleming with DPS Well and Septic. I do have a couple of comments. The first one being the well locations for lot 9 are, I believe they're in a conservation easement, which is gonna be an issue to get those wells drilled, I believe. So those may need to be relocated or the locations revised.
Jason, just for the record, I think you were actually talking about lot 10 over here where they're with the environmental.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Just want to clarify for the record.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. Sorry about that. And then the other main issue is that if these lots were to go through the subdivision, then so the original septic plan that was approved required that septic easement be recorded, and we don't have any record of it being recorded, anything that we're aware of. Yes, what they're highlighting right there. So since that's not been recorded, and now we are not allowed to create a new lot using a septic easement, that lot line would have to be changed so that septic area is entirely on lot 10 and not crossing over and requiring an easement to be created.
Hey, Jason, alternatively, because these properties are essentially frozen in time, moving the lot line is not really an option. The alternative would be reconfiguring the septic location completely onto the correct lot.
Correct. You could do that as well. Yes, if that's the
Yeah, it's the only feasible route if these are grandfatherable. They can't move the property lines aside from dedication.
And Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent of what we're trying to do is to create the proposed lot line between lots 9 and 10 on the deed line. Is that what that's what we need to hold to?
Yes, they have to match in order for you to qualify for grandfathering of any kind. The lot size, shape, configuration has to be exactly the same.
All right, so you know, and now that we have, you know, Phil is a builder and will be building, I'll know the number of bedrooms and I can refine and edit the proposed septic reserve area and septic fields to stay completely on lot 10.
This is Phil Phillips, the property owner. Just a question for you, and again, I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, but in speaking with Casey Cerner, my attorney this morning, she said that there were some exceptions to allowing an easement for a septic system. She said that she had one very, very recently, and she was going to look that up and bring that to my attention. But is there no opportunity whatsoever for me to create an easement, since I own both parcels, to allow for that septic system? I guess that's my question.
I'm personally not aware of one. I can look into it and ask my supervisor about that, but for the most part, the easement situation is for an existing house or property to put a septic system on an adjacent property to fix a failing system or something like that. So
The other thing I was going to say is, at the moment, it is correct, you own both lots, but in the future, if you decide to sell one of the lots, then we have somebody else in the mix, and it's just not an ideal situation to have a septic system for a given property on a separate lot. That's why we don't do it. We don't do it anymore. We also need to make findings as part of the preliminary plan approval that say that there are adequate public facilities to serve this lot, and that includes well and septic. So you can accommodate everything that you need to for this house within the lot that you're creating. It's part of the findings that we need to make.
Okay, I understand.
So,
Dean, do you know whether the existing septic system actually crossed that boundary line?
I'm not aware of where if. Yeah, I don't know where an existing septic system is, and if there was an existing septic system, it would be a pit and not fields as we're showing.
Okay. Well, Mr. Fleming, I'd appreciate it. I mean, if you can check with your supervisor just to find out if there are any exceptions. And I will also get more detail from Casey Cerner as well to find out what the details are of what she's talking about.
sure.
yeah, sure, that's no problem. So I'm just looking at the septic records that we have under this address. It looks like there was a system installed in 1971 for a 1,000-gallon tank in a trench. So I'm not sure if this is the exact house, because it was.
There would only be one house, and that would be for the existing house where the foundation still resides on the property.
Okay.
If you could send me that, Jason, I could plot it on the drawing.
Yeah. So this is showing that if you're facing the front of the house, this sketch shows the well on the left side of the house, and the septic tank is on the right with the trench. So I don't know if anybody's aware of the site conditions and if that matches up. The only reason why I question that is because The original permit just said Gregg Road, and at later time, at some point, someone wrote in the address 3727, which is what I believe we are associating with this particular house. So it might just be some question.
Just for clarity, if the septic tank and trench are on the right side of the existing house, it would reside on lot 9.
Potentially. I mean, it could follow your very similar to what you're proposing.
Let's just look at the records that Jason has, and then we'll continue the discussion. I think that's the best.
Okay.
I mean,
Right?
I agree. I think I did find that pit though, because I think that's what I was looking for, and I think it's on the adjoining lot, but we'll address that later.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Which other agency do you want to hear from? You want to hear from Fire Access?
Fire access is probably one of the big ones, and then DOT should
Also speak.
probably chime in. Hey, Marie.
Hey, so this is all about grandfathering for me. If this is determined that these were community planned to be buildable prior to 2010, then I'm a non-issue. So this is all about history for me on this one.
If it's not, then what is it that you need? Marie?
Red road basically means that these lots are not buildable. You've got to find water supply. You've got to do appropriate road surface. We're looking at road widths. We're looking at turnarounds. We're looking at current code is applicable of these lots. So that's going to be an issue.
Well, and just to be clear, it's kind of a non-issue because if these aren't grandfathered in one way or another, they will not be recorded as a lot.
Right, but it's helpful to understand that it just adds up to the issue that we're trying to. So Gregg Road is a rustic road.
Yeah, but it's only got 12 to 14. It really.
Okay, that's fine.
DOT, do you have any comments?
Yes, this is Billy Whalen. I put the comments in E-plans, but the main ones were the site distance. It's listed as limited by bend and limited by crest. So you need to clarify what the actual site distance is. Also, there's a fence in the right-of-way that will need to be removed or relocated outside the right-of-way prior to DOT accepting dedication. Also, the Rustic Roads Committee wants to see the driveways staked out. And I believe Darcy Buckley of the Rustic Roads Committee reached out to either the applicant or the owner to let them know. Those are the main comments.
Billy, it's Dean Packard.
Hi, I do.
We have staked out the driveway, and I have an appointment scheduled with them. I believe it's next week to walk the site and so they can see where the driveway entrances are. As a clarification, the site distances that I put on the sheets were the actual site distances, and I made the note about the bend and the crest to note that that's why that the distances weren't more.
Okay.
And the fence, I will get an accurate location of the fence on the plan, and the fence obviously will have to be outside of the right of way, but will it have to be outside of the PUE also, or is that separate?
I believe so. Rebecca, is that correct? Outside of the PUA?
I don't know.
Typically, yes, that's free and clear.
Okay.
You would have to get permission from Pepco. I believe there's actually a comment in the plans saying that if the fence is in PUE, then it has to be, you have to get express permission for it to be there. But typically PUEs are free and clear. Grade no more than a 4-to-1.
Again, this is Phil Phillips. I have a question regarding the fence, because I just installed the fence with the permit. That the permit gives me permission to install on a right of way, is what it says. I had specific discussions with Christina Contreras at DPS about this. She indicated that there could be an issue here, but what she also indicated is that she said, well, how far do you want to keep your fence off of the road? I said, the entire purpose for me putting this fence in is to stop the illegal dumping. I had tons of debris dropped on this property because it's in an area on Gregg Road, which is completely secluded. No one can see it. Landscape companies would come in and dump off all of their materials. So I had it all taken out and I put the fence in. And as I explained to the county, I really wanted it to be 8 feet is what I wanted from the road. And they looked and they said, well, what's the distance of the one across the street? And I said, it's a farm fence and it's 4 feet from the road. So she indicated she thought that it was reasonable on a rustic road to put in this beautiful oak fence. It will kill me if I have to take that fence down.
I mean, it would have to be relocated. You could still have it. It would just have to be pushed back out of the right of way. The problem is that when you install a fence even with a permit, you have to take in consideration what your next move is. And since your next move is subdivision, you're required to dedicate. So theoretically, it should have been built outside of the area that would have potentially been dedication.
And that was the discussion with the county, because that was known that this could be dedicated as a result of the subdivision. And what they said is they still thought that was perfectly reasonable for me to put this fence in. And because it goes with everything else on Gregg Road, if you can picture it across the street, there's a barn that's on the road. The corning of the barn is on the road.
Sure.
And I kept it back 10 feet
Right,
because I wanted to have
you
a
don't-
little bit more.
Yeah.
But the problem I have is that you went in and you put the fence in, and then now you're coming in for the subdivision. So if you would have come in for the subdivision, somebody would have told you before you put the fence in that your fence can't be within the right of way. So to me, you did the steps backwards, and it just looks it doesn't look good for you. So we will consider it, but we can't take right away with. I don't think we can take right away with a fence in the road. I understand your point if you're trying to keep people from dumping. I don't know what the fence looks like, to be honest, so I don't understand. Did this go through Rustic Roads Committee, the fence?
It's not a development application.
I mean,
No, county permit, that's all.
right, but doesn't Rustic Roads have to consider the fence?
Yes.
Rustic Roads looks at access points associated with the features identified in the master plan. What triggers their review is subdivision and adding new access points. They're not a DPS reviewing agency.
What I think Rebecca is saying is that they consult Rustic Roads knowing that they're coming to subdivision afterwards, to be proactive and know, would this be an issue? I think that's what Rebecca is asking.
And the answer is no.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, they look at all the rustic roads in the county, and when there's development, as part of this application, they'll be looking at this application and they'll comment on it. So I'm sure that the fence will come up and they will, they'll give you feedback.
As part of this process.
As part of the process,
Okay, that's fine.
yes.
I understand.
DOT, as well as our transportation planner, Brett Brown, will coordinate with the Rustic Roads. And I'm sure they'll discuss the fence.
And I added that in
I will meet them out there next week and I'll bring it up with them to make sure it's part of their report.
Thank you, Dean.
I just wanted to interject here quickly as well. I hear what Phil is saying about coordinating with the county for the fence permit. But I gotta say, I mean, as long as the right of way is not dedicated, we have no consideration of that fence being inside the right of way. So even though that fence permit was granted, it had no consideration of that being a future right of way because that was not. So now that we are actually going through the dedication process, we have to abide by what the requirements are.
And speaking from the end of the people who approved the fence permit, the lines that we are privy to in this drawing were not presented on the drawing that was given to us for the fence. And it shows the fence, the drawing we got shows the fence on the inside of the property line, which is when the property line was in a different place than it is in this drawing.
That was Laura Bradshaw.
Yes.
Laura, do the property lines follow the center of the road here? Because I mean, I think that's the existing property line is probably what I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Without what you're saying. What it
All I
shows.
remember is that when we were at pre-DRC, I pulled it out of the archive and made that comment. I didn't look. I can go back and dig it up and see what I can see and show it to you.
It makes sense that.
Yeah,
I mean, you're not
they
gonna
would show the existing
a
property line,
proposed-
right?
It's not a subdivision plans permit, so.
Right.
And what I used for the fence permit is what I believe is this exact document right here. I mean, that's what I marked in where the fence would go is.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, given all the information and the, if there is illegal dumping, if there's.
There was, it stopped.
Yeah. I guess just something to be aware of moving forward, that would be MCDOT's responsibility for maintenance. If there's dumping, he can call you all and.
Not that I'm aware. We don't.
Yes, right. Who would he call then?
If it's in the right of way or on the property?
In the right of way, yeah. After the subdivision goes through, we make him move his fence. They start dumping again. Who's responsible to take that out if it's in the right of way?
Isn't it, Laura? Isn't it something like there's a housing thing, or I know there's something, but I don't think it's us. I forget. What's the number? Then we were calling them for Rustic Road for the rock property. Jonathan, do you remember?
We can come back to that. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. We can come back to that.
Who is it? Who is that one that we were dealing with it on rock property? I forget who it is, but there is some division.
I mean, housing deals with, unkempt yards and stuff like that, but I'm not sure if they do that in the ag reserve.
Yeah.
I think illegal dumping will probably start with the police.
Okay.
All right.
I think we're getting a little off track here. We are over our time. Are there any last minute questions from Dean or Phil?
I have a question for Dean. The Parks Department asked for the house to be set back 100 foot from the park line, and I was concerned about that because it would put it almost into the septic reserve area that we're trying to tighten up.
Yeah, this is Chuck Hines with Parks. The idea there was that our arborist was concerned about potential hazard trees. What we typically ask for is a 100-foot buffer to avoid potential tree falls onto private property impacting structures. So that was the idea.
Because the proposed siting of the house is close to where the existing foundation was, and that is a somewhat cleared area, and I don't believe there's any significantly large trees close to it, but I need to figure out what my boundaries are to make the design. What the parameters are. If it's 80 feet, if it's 60 feet, if it's 100 feet, I need to know where the position is.
Yeah, well, it's not a regulatory item per se. It's more of a request. So we can work with you on that.
Okay. And the last question that I have is, I missed the first few minutes, but are we actually grandfathered?
I'm sorry, repeat that, Dean.
I said somebody called me. Are we actually grandfathered, or is that still being debated?
That's still being determined.
Yeah, but I think we're gonna probably have to reach out to you with additional information, and I'm gonna spend some time with Steve Smith looking at all the records. But as of right now, we cannot give you a definitive answer.
All right, so that's all the questions that I have, and we can follow up, with further discussions with, Phil and Casey and staff.
I only have one question. All right, it's a big one. If it's not grandfathered, if it's grandfathered, then most of what we're talking about here doesn't apply. The septic does, and whatever it is for putting in a home, but most of everything else that we've talked about here doesn't apply. In the case of, for example, fire and rescue, where it says you can't do this on that road, is insufficient. Is this subdivision dead?
No. So that's what I was saying, is it's kind of that comment is, Maria is not looking at it from a subdivision standpoint. So
okay.
that is, if it's a standard subdivision, that would be her response. So that's why she's provided it.
Okay.
But that only kicks in if it were a subdivision that was coming in right now that was for new houses, that there was nothing. I believe 2010 is the date that she said. If they're grandfathered, then there's there's a loophole, so to speak, that would allow you to proceed with the current situation.
Okay.
If it's not, then you would theoretically have some major issues. But if it's not, it's not it's a non-issue, because if these aren't grandfathered, then it's undevelopable.
I understand.
John, this is Josh. I think we are looking at multiple layers here. I believe it's a pre-58, doesn't require platting, then it wouldn't require fire and rescue. But if it requires subdivision, even under grandfather, then it would still apply to fire and rescue, because all that the subdivision zoning ordinance only waive the size and shape requirements of the zone. It doesn't waive all other subdivision. So if it's grandfathered, it still needs to meet all the other criteria of subdivision. If it's pre-58, it does not.
Yes, there are two different roads. At this time, we are talking about grandfathering only, because that's what this DRC is about. The pre-58 is a different road that has different quirks, a lot of overlap. But as far as fire and rescue goes, I'm going to recommend that Dean coordinate with Marie directly to figure out exactly how to proceed.
So there could still be a way forward with the subdivision, even if in fact it's not grandfathered.
Okay, hang on, guys. You're trying to confuse me through all this. So in 2010, it was determined that lots that were laid out prior to 2010 as parcels or lots that were considered to be single family developable pieces of property, those were community planned and were not subject to current fire department access code. So I'm not looking at pre-58. I'm looking at strictly, were these intended to be developed as single family lots as they were laid out prior to 2010, which it sounds like they were, and you're just going to need to provide some documentation to me. That's going to negate meeting current code for fire department access. If you cannot provide that sort of grandfathering documentation, now we're looking at current code, water supply on the site, bigger driveways, something in trade-off for the insufficient access on Gregg Road. So there's ways to make it happen. One's much more expensive, obviously, than the other. So no, this is not dead in the water, but will require a great deal of coordination.
I will get the
But
information and coordinate with you, Murray.
Okay, but I just want to be clear because I think there's a lot of confusion here. If this cannot be grandfathered in any way, shape, or form, this cannot be subdivided.
Correct.
Okay.
The only scenario is that this is a viable application under some kind of grandfathering, all of which would have been planned before 2010.
Yeah.
So the 2010 code issue for fire and rescue is essentially a non-issue because your plan would be dead in the water, so to speak.
So the grandfathering actually has two different aspects. One of them is the one that gets me out of most of what's here, and the other is still allowing it to go forward as 2 buildable lots.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And one's going to require obviously a lot more.
Yes.
We'll decide what's going to
We've got
apply,
many
but I
layers
understand.
of this cake.
I understand.
And it's kind of, we have to figure out which route to go. There's 3 avenues. You have 358, you have grandfather to an old zone, or you have dead in the water.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll be looking at the first 2 first. So.
Hi, this is Mary Jo. I just want to chime in real quick. I know we're over. Just jumping back to the well and septic, I just want to second Jason's comment that the wells be relocated outside of the stream buffer / conservation easements. And I also would you're talking about relooking at the septic, and I just want to make sure you think about the septic requirement setbacks from streams that are applicable in this case because you're in the Patuxent. So just be mindful of that when you're looking at that. I think it's 300 feet from the Hollings or Patuxent and 200 feet from any streams the septic fields need to be. So just beware of that. That's all. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.